Hello everybody, I am Jarrett Ross, the GeneaVlogger, and on today's video, I'm going to be doing something a little bit different and kind of just talking off the cuff. And this is based on a post that I saw recently from a genealogy colleague of mine, Karen Binder. For those who are unfamiliar with Karen, she's an absolute force in the investigative genetic genealogy world. She spent many years as part of the DNA Doe Project's team, and then she recently took the role as the director for the Investigative Genetic Genealogy Center at Ramapo College in New Jersey. Hopefully I said that right because I always say that college name wrong, so sorry if I got it wrong. But the post that I want to talk about today from Karen is about a major update that happened with Ancestry's terms of service that really changes the game for the investigative genetic genealogy community, as well as the entire forensic genealogy community. Now, before we actually jump into the post, I do want to clarify a couple of things that is a little confusing for a lot of people, unfortunately. And the biggest thing is, what's the difference between forensic genealogy and investigative genetic genealogy? And basically, forensic genealogy is any sort of use of genealogy for legal proceedings. So this could be heir research, this could be repatriation of military remains, as well as investigative genetic genealogy, or what some people will even call FIG, forensic investigative genetic genealogy. And investigative genetic genealogy, which I'm just going to call IGG from here on out, is the use of DNA to then identify unknown human remains or identify perpetrators of violent crimes. So just some nuance that I wanted to have before we jump into the post, but now let's take a look. So Karen says, for all of my genealogy, traditional genealogy, FG, that's the forensic genealogy, and IGG, investigative genetic genealogy, colleagues, you should know that recently Ancestry has changed its terms of service to prevent searching of public records hosted on the Ancestry site to keep investigative genetic genealogy and forensic genealogists out. The new terms of service state that users must agree not to use the service in connection with any law enforcement investigation or judicial proceeding. This means no cold case investigations, unidentified human remains, violent crimes, murder and rape, or wrongful convictions. Judicial proceedings also encompasses the work of forensic genealogists and genetic genealogists working on probate, mineral rights, property rights, paternity cases, etc. And as someone with a lot of experience working with all sorts of genealogy websites, and especially working on investigative genetic genealogy cases, Ancestry is such a major part of that research. Having something like that taken away is going to make it so much more difficult for that work to be done, and especially for things to be solved. But also, I have to imagine that this is something that could affect citizenship cases. Now, I don't know for sure, and one of the things with the terms of service wording is it's somewhat vague, any judicial proceeding. And I have to imagine that a big part of why Ancestry is doing this is because there are a lot of vocal people in the genealogy community and outside of the genealogy community who worry a lot about how genealogy websites are utilized for investigative cases. And so when it really comes down to it, I think it's the IGG side that's the thing that pushed them to that point. So continuing reading, mind you, these are public records that Ancestry hosts and is now limiting who can access them. This includes records that are populated by those very same users, such as yearbooks and find-a-grave photos, which they have access to slowly because of their users' uploads to the site. I know for a fact that Ancestry has taken steps to enforce this policy. This will severely limit and slow IGG practitioners' ability to restore the identities of the unidentified deceased, to resolve cases of violent crime, to repatriate military remains, etc. And these are honestly some really good points, especially when it comes to the whole public record side of things. There's a lot of stuff in Ancestry that are public records, but even more than public records, because this applies to the entire family of Ancestry websites. So that includes Fold 3, which are military records. That also includes newspapers.com, which is obviously newspapers, but that also includes Find a Grave, which is actually a volunteer-based website. Everything on there is because they have volunteers adding things, taking photographs. And I actually remember seeing that there was a comment, I believe, under one of Karen's posts about this, where it was someone basically saying, I add a lot to Find a Grave, but I also do forensic genealogy. Based on this new terms of service, I can't utilize the work that I did for Find a Grave. The photos that that person took and put up on Find a Grave, the information that person did and put up on Find a Grave, the connections they made between the different family graves and building, there's actually kind of trees you can build in a sense on Find a Grave. And she can't go on a Find a Grave and utilize that. I know there's a lot of other companies in the genealogy space who make it very apparent we do not want law enforcement to utilize our website. So like I know MyHeritage, they are very, very serious about this as well. And they actually took away the ability to upload DNA recently to their website to transfer your DNA from, if you test on Ancestry, transferring it over to MyHeritage. You used to be able to do that, but you can't do that anymore. And the main reason they stopped allowing it had to do with investigative genetic genealogy. And as someone who actually practiced investigative genetic genealogy, I can tell you that most of the things that people are afraid of are really not true. Like, the whole worry about, the FBI has your DNA. That is so far from the truth. When they're uploading a DNA profile to GEDmatch or Family Tree DNA, if you're opted in, they're not going to be able to see all of your DNA. All they're going to be able to see is that you are matching to the DNA of whatever case they're working. So if it's unidentified remains, that means that you have a relative who died and their remains have gone unidentified since then, and your DNA could be the thing that helps finally identify them. But as well, that DNA could possibly be from a violent criminal who committed a murder, committed rape, committed all sorts of other violent crimes, and some of these being serious cold cases that trace back really far. Most of the cases that I had worked were decades old and some even over 50 years old. All right, but continuing on with Karen's post, the dead cannot speak and we are their only voice. As genealogists, we know this better than anyone. If you are close with someone at Ancestry headquarters and think you can make an impact, please speak up and speak out. Please also consider where to spend your genealogy money, as that can make a huge impact as well. Now, I completely understand that Ancestry as a company has the right to choose what their website is used for. And while I think there definitely is a little bit of kind of gray area when it comes to a lot of their public records and things like that, I do also recognize, they spent a lot of money often to get those things digitized. But with that said, I do think that it is an absolute shame that Ancestry is creating this term of service that is so broad. I think making it so broad is a serious detriment to the entire genealogy community, because I feel like that is some of the most practical world uses of genealogy. When it really comes down to it, doing genealogy and building family trees and all of that really is just kind of a luxury sort of thing. It's not something people necessarily need to have. Granted, there are a lot of cases with medical and stuff like that where it can be very helpful, but when you get into forensic genealogy, that's the place where genealogy has a real world impact, much more than even the scientific studies and things like that that allow us to learn more about the history of population groups. It's certainly interesting, but cases actually allowing a soldier's remains from the 1940s to be identified and then repatriated and then buried here in the United States, that's a big thing for that family, for the surviving family members. And then extend it to all of those Doe cases, the unidentified remains in the US already, and then the investigative cases, the murder cases, and things like that. And as well, I think it's a worrisome thing for genealogists that are just doing general work as well, because what if Ancestry decides to then take that away too? Because Ancestry also has, their pro-genealogist service and things like that. And so if they wanted to make it so that genealogists are not allowed to use their service at all for any sort of work, that's going to be a huge detriment to the entire community. When it really comes down to it, Ancestry truly has made themselves the major hub of most genealogy, at least from an American standpoint. I imagine it's pretty similar to a lot of the other English speaking countries. So, not just the US, but Canada, all of the UK, Australia, New Zealand, maybe even South Africa. But those are kind of, a lot of the English speaking countries are the main places I see Ancestry. But as well, Ancestry has websites for people all around the world. So, they really do have a large user base, but they've also been around for so long that it's basically become the major hub that it has. It's a huge step back, and I do hope that they decide to change it. At the very least, hopefully they'll change it to allow some forensic genealogy. Luckily, I mean, there are a lot of other websites out there with great databases. A lot of different record sets are available through government entities themselves, so the government can access those records. So for any genealogist that's been working on Ancestry for a long time, this would almost be like first driving a car all around town and then that car being taken away from you, and now you've got to ride a horse. And sure, you can still get around, it's just going to take you a lot longer to get where you need to go. So I do hope that Ancestry reconsiders, but I guess we'll just have to see. But if you want to see a video about some other stuff that Ancestry's done recently in terms of updating their website, be sure to check out this video of mine right here. Thank you to my Patreon patrons and YouTube members.